If children are listening to this, adult children, you don't know what to buy mum and dad this year for Christmas, buy them a passport. It's the best Christmas present you can give them.
Welcome to the Chasing Care podcast. I'm your host, Gavin Chase, and on today's episode, we've got a very interesting subject. We're looking specifically at empowering vulnerable people in society when it comes to care. A lot of us have to make decisions in terms of, can we remain at home? Do we need to go into a care home? But there's so much more that goes on behind the scenes in terms of understanding how best to progress with decisions. So today, helping us make some clarity around decision making and processes, I'm delighted to say that we've got Caroline Romero from Grey Matters Consultancy. Welcome, Caroline.
Well, good morning, Gavin, and thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm very excited.
My pleasure. Well, the aim of the podcast is always to help people that are vulnerable or unsure in terms of care, be that home care, living care, care homes, supported living and the like. So I'm really looking forward to finding out the specifics of what Grey Matter Consultancy does on behalf of the vulnerable. But before we get into that subject matter, for the listener, please introduce yourself and exactly what you do.
Right. Well, my name is Caroline Romero. My first client back in the day was my father. My father had retired from a job that he had the majority of his life at 65. And for the first 10 years of his life, he was absolutely in control. He knew where he was going to go. He'd downsized from a 4-bedroom house to a 3-bedroom bungalow. He'd picked the bungalow because it was close to a chemist. He knew where the medical centre was going to be. He knew where the dog walks were going to be. He planned everything. And I thought, this is great. And then at 75, he started to go slightly off the boil. Never got a short-term memory, but just would make some really dumb decisions. And I was a bit shocked as a daughter because I thought, my dad's no longer in control of his activities. And it worried me, it scared me. And I'm going back now to the 1990s, because my dad had me when he was in his 40s and he was born in 1919. So we're talking a long time ago. Dad was fine. I sort of said to him, well, I've discovered this thing called attendance allowance. I didn't know anything about it, but I just knew it was a little bit of pot of money that would help him get through the week better. He could spend it on what he wanted to do to make his life better. And he said to me, I'm not claiming that. I've never claimed benefits in my life. I'm not going to start now. And I said, Dad, you're wrong. Because Mum, when she had us, was given the family allowance. And you accepted that money gratefully because that's what you were entitled to. And it was her money and she spent it on what she wanted for the children, my brother and myself. So it took me 6 months to persuade him that I could put the claim in for attendance allowance. I did it, I was successful, and I forgot all about it. Roll forward a few more years, I did it for my mother-in-law. Again, I did it, forgot all about it. Then I went to work for a retirement builder who built specialist retirement flats. And I realized I had a skill in talking to the people who were buying a flat, who were downsizing. And I would say to them, don't be fearful of selling your house and moving into a flat. You will have a whole new lifestyle. And I came to the conclusion, and I might be right, I might be wrong, but I think about 75 years old is the pinnacle of making a decision of moving. So that was my first gut feeling when I was advising people in this retirement complex. Fast forward to 2012, and I became a widow myself. I was 54, and my whole retirement life plans went out the window. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do now? How am I going to manage my life? And a very good dear friend of mine who had been widowed herself, she said, never say no to anybody who asks you for anything or wants to take you somewhere. Because the minute you start saying no, is your whole world will start to shrink because they won't ask you again. And I took that advice. I Googled how to be a widow. And I said, right, okay, how am I going to be a widow? Do I wear black? Do I never laugh again? Do I never go on dates again? Do I go out to dinner with friends? What do I do? Has my life terminated now at 54? When I was Googling, up comes DWP Widows Benefits. And I thought, that's strange. No one's told me about this. So I rang the number, and a really nice young man came on the phone. Best phone call of my entire life. And he said, Mrs. Romero, you're entitled to XYZ. It's all changed now, so I don't want to go on what was 12 years ago, but because things change. You're entitled to XYZ. And I said, why hasn't anybody told me that I could claim a pot of money that would help me with my immediate needs? And he said, DWP don't advertise anything. You've got to stumble across it. You've got to discover what's out there. And I put the phone down and I rang my cousin up and I said, I've had a really strange phone call. And I said, so strange that I want to create an agency helping, and in my mind, vulnerable women. That's what I had in mind. I thought, vulnerable women who don't know what they're entitled to. And 20 minutes later, we coined the phrase Grey Matters Consultancy. And that was in 2012. I've grown the business from 8 clients in the first year, which I was quite happy with. I've now got 10 franchises throughout the country, Southport, West Wales, Cardiff, down the spine of the Thames Valley and into Twickenham. And the demand for advice and support that I can give the elderly and the vulnerable is massive. It's like a juggernaut that I've started that I can't, it's rolling. So that's my backstory about why I do what I do. I'm passionate in unlocking for people things they didn't know they were entitled to.
And that's a massive challenge, I think, in society. You've painted a very detailed picture there based on life experience. Yeah. And what fascinated me at some point was your father saying, I don't want anything. I guess that we hear this story a lot, don't we, in terms of losing their independence means that they're not going to let anyone help them. Interestingly, as well, there's a fair amount of statistics out there and data out there that says things like the elderly would love to stay in their own home, but they don't want their family members to look after them, which is fascinating as well. So it's a very complex scenario that we find ourselves in. But what we do know is that the aging population is certainly getting bigger. The government,
yes.
I am sure, based on what you've just said about the DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, they're not going to advertise the fact that they have to put money on the table for people.
No.
Why would they? Because they don't have enough money in the first place. And they spend most of it into, this is a personal opinion, they spend most of the money into hospitals, into the NHS, not into the social care side, which is why, again, coming back to the Chasing Care podcast, the whole reason that we started was to try and educate and help people. Now, if I can just go right the way back to the beginning, you talked about attendance allowance, and I don't want to go through the detail of every single thing that we might touch upon, but that was the first thing that you touched upon, the first thing that you were told about. And what is it? Well, I mean, how do you find out about it? What is it? Let's talk about something straightforward and simple.
Okay, so attendance allowance is a benefit that's in 2 parts. There's a lower rate and a higher rate. Now, when I talk to people about attendance allowance, I tend to ask 3 simple questions. Are you over 66? Do you go to the doctors quite a bit? And how many times do you flush the toilet in the night?
Okay.
Yeah? Because if you're over 66, you can claim attendance allowance. That's the first criteria. The second criteria is you've obviously got to have health needs. Okay? to claim it, because and people see their health as wallpaper. Yeah. I was with somebody yesterday, and he sort of starts off by talking about his cardiac problems, but actually, at the end of the day, he'd only got one eye and had so for 30 years. It was just part of his everyday life.
Yeah.
But actually, his vision is limited. He's got hearing aids, so he's deaf, and so you've got to have health needs, and waking up in the middle of the night is exhausting. If you don't get a good night's sleep, your health will deteriorate further. And as you get older, it's worse. Because you literally, you can't function. You wake up at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and you're already exhausted from a poor quality sleep. So your day then escalates into dozing in the chair, having a nap after breakfast, whatever it takes. It takes you 40 minutes to get dressed as opposed to 10 minutes. Everything escalates, everything expands because you're exhausted. So those 3 criteria means that once I know that you've got those three points, you're over 66, you go to the doctors and you wake up in the night, then I would take you on and I would want to claim attendance allowance for you. The money is non-means tested and it's tax-free.
Could we just understand what attendance allowance is and why it exists?
Allowance is about 40 years old. It's been going for a long time. It is a weekly sum paid every 4 weeks. It is there to support your health needs. So, for example, you might need to get in a carer in once or twice a day to make sure that you're okay. So it would fund care. I mean, the £108.55 a week funds about 4 to 5 hours of domiciliary carers coming in. It's not. It just scratches the surface. You know, if you're self-funding, which means you pay for your own fees in a care home. I've got a client who lives in the village, and her home fees are nearly £2,000 a week. So 108 quid goes nowhere.
But it does go somewhere. That's the point, isn't it?
And it can actually change people's lives.
Yeah. Give me an example of how that how you've seen that work.
I've got a client who is struggling to heat her bungalow. She was scared about the loss of winter fuel allowance. She phoned me up and said, "Can I talk to you about attendance allowance? Because I've discovered about my friend of mine told me about it." I now know that she can afford for her heating bills to be paid. I now know that she can afford to go to Tesco's or any other supermarket to do her weekly shop.
And that makes a significant difference, doesn't it, to the well-being of the person? And it must help in some ways, although I'm sure families get frustrated like we all do. But a son or a daughter might be thinking, you know what, now I know that Dad can pay for his winter fuel, that's got to make them feel a lot better about how Dad might be surviving in some ways in later
absolutely
life.
I mean, I often work with relatives. I was with a niece on Saturday helping her aunt, because people do care about their aged relatives, and also you're doing something. You're claiming attendance allowance. You've got an action there. You've got some support. You're making sure that they've got all that they're entitled to. Yeah.
Do we know what sort of percentage of people don't maybe claim what they're entitled to?
I don't know the actual percentage, but I do know that the government allocate £5 billion a year that's not even tapped into to claim attendance allowance.
Oh, wow.
I know.
That's shocking. So we talked about attendance allowance, and as I said, we're not going to go into the detail, but go on. I know you're going to scare the audience now, or maybe enlighten them, because I'm just going to ask you, give me a list of the sort of things that are available to people that they may not be aware of.
First of all, Grey Matters specialises in the elderly. but I also support the vulnerable. So from 5 years old until 16, children can claim disability living allowance. Now that is a benefit it's all from the same stable that I'm going to talk about. But if you've got a child with autism or a child with ADHD, parents don't know they're entitled to some form of benefit that would support them with supporting their child's extra needs that they've got. So I quite often help children from 5 to 16. From 16 to 66, you can claim personal independent payments. I had a client last March 2023, and we put a claim for personal independent payment in because he has a very severe physical condition that affects his daily life. He cannot function mentally because his physical condition affects how he even leaves his front door. And the DWP said no, they refused it. We then went to mandatory reconsideration, which is their push word for saying the first level of, do you know what, you're wrong. And we got refused. We went to appeal. In January, I phoned up and I said, where's our appeal date? Where's our date in court? We got the date in court on the 23rd of July of this year. We went into a court. The gentleman, who's in his 50s, cried because he was so overwhelmed by the process and the fact he was out in the fresh air and the open. And his mum is in her 80s. We were in central London. We went into the court, 3 judges. I'm not allowed to speak. All I can do is be there for the gentleman, my client, to make sure he's okay. After an hour of intense interrogation by the judges, how his health needs are affected, everything, really personal, deep questions. I don't want to go into now, but really, really inhumane questions. Questions you don't want to answer, especially when you're a gentleman and you don't want to talk about stuff. We left the room, went back in again to get the result, and the judge said, we are awarding you the full PIP amount. And I said, and it is being backdated to March 2023, isn't it? And she went, yes, it is. And so PIP is really important. There's lots of health conditions that affect PIP. From 66 onwards, we claim attendance allowance. One of the biggest things I've got is people with Parkinson's disease don't know they're entitled to it. They can claim for council tax reduction because Parkinson's is a neurological condition and therefore they can get it. And the council tax reduction is really horrible. It's called severe mental impairment discount. Who wants to stick their hand up and say, I'm severely mentally impaired? No one. No one with dignity.
It does sound a little bit strange. I'm just deeply fascinated by the conversation so far and the frustration that I'm already starting to feel that there's things out there that don't get talked about for the elderly and vulnerable.
And sometimes people don't want to admit that they claimed attendance allowance. They won't tell their friends they've got it, and their friends are all in the same circle. And I try to empower people. I say, please, can you tell your best mates that you've got this money? Because they might be entitled to it as well. You don't know what they're feeling, projecting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not wanting to take you out and your business out of the equation, but broadly speaking, if I'm the elderly person and I don't know Grey Consultancy and I was just Googling or searching or thinking about this subject matter, would I just go to my social services department, or do I go and speak to my doctor, or, just to start the process? Because it sounds to me as if you might be doing some stuff which is quite detailed and quite specific, but there's got to be millions of other people out there that just don't know where to start.
Okay, the doctor won't help you.
Okay.
You're lucky to see a doctor. The doctor won't tell you about it. The social workers may get involved but who wants to call social services and say, I'm struggling? Not many people do. People are proud. You can go to Citizens Advice Bureau.
Yeah.
But our local Citizens Advice Bureau actually pushes them up my way. They're too overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And Yeah. So, and you can do the form yourself. However, if you put one word wrong on the form, then the whole form's rejected.
Right. Okay. Let's go back a step. Why isn't it? Because when I got 50, that was a few years ago, when I was 50, all of a sudden I got all the old travel agency information through. And I won't mention any specific brand, but I think we all know. But I turned 50 and all of a sudden I got that. When I turned, I think it was, I can't remember what age it was exactly, 55 or something. It was prostate, check your prostate. And then there's other things. We do get stuff coming through our letterbox, don't we? Telling us
Yeah, we
we've
do.
got to look
We
to
do.
this, or we're entitled to that, or have you thought
Well,
about this? There's lots of
I
comes through, but it doesn't sound to me as if
no.
attendance allowance, blue badges, I don't know what else we can talk about. All those little bits and bobs that people are entitled to. You don't get a letter through the post saying, have you claimed for A, B, C, D, E, and signposting
No.
people. Isn't it strange again? Here we go. This is another personal thought. These people that are 66 years of age, let's pick that number because that's the number you just mentioned.
Yeah.
They may not have capacity to understand all of these things come through their letterbox.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was with a lovely lady who's 66, 67, and she lost her husband 2 months ago. And she's shot to pieces. She didn't know what she could claim. She didn't know what she was allowed to do. And I sat with her for 2 hours recently. And I said, you know what you've got to do? She's got a car on the driveway that was her husband's car. Too big for her to drive. I said, sell the car, get yourself a small automatic so it's easier on your ankles and all the rest of it. Get yourself a small automatic. I said, but renew your driving license, because she had a paper driving license. Oh my God. And renew your driving license, but make sure your passport is always valid. Even though you haven't left the country in God knows how many years, it doesn't matter. Keep your ID valid and up to date. You need some form of identification. She'd let her husband do all the banking, all the finances. She had no idea what was what. And I said, please keep your passport live. And that's my one thing. If children are listening to this, adult children, you don't know what to buy mum and dad this year for Christmas, buy them a passport. It's the best Christmas present you can give them.
It sounds to me as if there's a reason for it.
Well, because they were trialling it in the Midlands a couple of years ago. You could only have an operation if you could produce some valid ID. And if you couldn't produce valid ID at the NHS in the Midlands in one trust, then you couldn't have an operation. And I don't know whether it was a 6-month trial or whatever, but I just know at the time I thought, oh my God, they're going down the route where if you go into A&E, they might not see you because they can't prove who you are. I don't know the way this government's going. I've got no idea. But I do think everybody should have a valid ID.
Okay, a valid ID means that you can be
Passport.
validated by the authority that may be there to support you with some
Yes.
form of financial support.
Yes.
Now, does this get affected when you talk to people about domiciliary care or live-in care or supported living or care homes or nursing homes? Does it get all a bit messy if you decide to stay at home rather than go to a care home, or is it easier to stay at home than being in a care home? Paint a picture on that.
If I was speaking to my very dear friend, Scott McRae from Right at Home, who runs a Maidenhead branch of Right at Home, he would always advocate people staying in their own home. especially especially if you've got dementia or Alzheimer's, because you know where you are. You'd start with domiciliary carers, and you'd go into living carers if you've got a big enough space to house them. Going to a home isn't always the best option. It can be for some, and I've got clients in care homes that I support. But they are self-funding, so they pay for their own care home fees. Yeah.
But the question more relates to whether or not they're entitled to all of the benefits.
Yes. If they're self-funding, they are.
Okay.
So if you're in a care home and you're paying your own fees at £2,000 a month, £2,000 a week, then you are entitled to claim attendance allowance. If the council are paying for your care fees because your savings are under a limit and you haven't got any money, then no, you're not, because that will get mopped up with the council will sort that out with the government.
Thanks for the clarity on that. Going back to a point that I was making a few seconds ago about people having capacity.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody doesn't necessarily have capacity, I mean, you yourself were concerned about your father many years ago when he reached the age of 75. There may be people listening today that think dad needs a bit of help, or mum needs a bit of help, or mum and dad need a bit of help, but they may not have capacity. They may have some. What about power of attorney for the family? What's the story here? And also, can you tie it into, if you can remember to do this, when you talked about going to court the other day, you weren't allowed to speak. You could only be there. That really confused me. Why the hell can't you, as an advisor, advise the court? Anyway, so there's two sort of questions there: power of attorney and also the court process.
Let me. They are two separate things. Right. First of all, lasting powers of attorney. There are two lasting powers of attorney. There's property and finance, and there's health. Now, in my experience, it's my opinion, so shoot me if I'm wrong, solicitors generally will not get their hands dirty with the health power of attorney. They will always sell you the property and finance lasting power of attorney. There is no such thing as next of kin. Legally, there's no such thing as next of kin. If you haven't got an LPA in place, then...
An LPA?
Lasting power of attorney. Then you are... I can't think of a nice word. You're in the mire. So, if a consultant comes along to the bedside and says, Mrs. Jones, I'm going to have to do this, that, and the other procedure to you, and you haven't got LPA over your mother, Mrs. Jones Jr. has got not a say legally. They might listen to what your thoughts and wishes are, but they can decide. If you've got an LPA, lasting power of attorney, over your mother for a health one, you've got control. And it's all about empowering not just the vulnerable, but also the vulnerable's children or relatives. And you've got control. So when I do a lasting power of attorney for my clients, I always do both. Always. I will not just do one. I will do both. I will do the health and wellness one and the property and finance. So there's no such thing as next of kin. It's the most important document you've got. If you've got a child who's 18, who's going off to Thailand on a gap year, you make sure they've got an LPA in place. Otherwise, you haven't got a leg to stand on in order to get them back to UK and can sort things out. Everybody should have an LPA in place. It's really, really, really vitally important. So you've got to look at it and make sure that it's valid. So you get the two documents together. It gives you control. It gives you peace of mind. I'm 66. My two children, Tom and Laura, have both got lasting power of attorney over me.
I like a little bit of control.
Yeah. Well, no, they can't control my bank balance. They can't control anything because I've got capacity. But if my capacity goes off the boil, say, for example, I went and had a road traffic accident and I had a brain injury, then they could step in immediately, control the bank account, control my business, control what my health wishes are. Do not resuscitate, etc. They control all of that because I trust them.
Yeah. And as you say, it's important to be able to get that in place before you need it, really.
Yeah,
There you go,
well,
before you need it.
once your capacity starts to go, you legally can't get an LPA put into position. It's too late. And then you have to go to the court of protection, and that is an absolute minefield nightmare.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about that subject. So it's really important that we have either somebody with capacity that you can deal with, or
Yeah.
or there's an LPA in place that the family can take control as needed. So that's great.
Yeah.
You say that it's a separate thing when you were talking about going to court. Is the family allowed to
Yeah.
say
We were,
things or
so it was an hour-long interview with the three judges. My client was sitting in the middle. There's three chairs. There was his mother, who's in her 80s. She was crying. All I could do was support the family. At the very, very end, we were asked for our thoughts and thoughts about the process. So the mum gave her views on how her son was day-to-day living. And I sat and I said, I'm here to support my client because he cannot cope with this process. Cannot cope with the process. So, but I wasn't allowed to speak during the whole hour-long interview. But I went into the court because I wanted to support my client, to give him that extra peace of mind.
And that's exactly what people need, because in that particular scenario, you had an elderly mother who may have or may not have had full capacity herself, and then you had the vulnerable individual, and you were there just to support them. So that's fascinating. We've come to the end, really, of the session today, but you've typically, of guests on this podcast, you've unearthed many, many challenges. Probably we are all even more confused than we were before because we hadn't given it a thought. Now we've started to think about it. And it really is just a maze, for sure. It just sounds it. If somebody was thinking, oh my God, I don't know what to do, can I get a bit of extra support for my vulnerable adult or child, maybe?
Yeah. Yes.
How do they reach out to you, Caroline?
Right. So I have a website, which is www.grey-matters-consultancy.com. The main number to ring me on is 0330 1340 166. I will always take anybody's call. I would always answer every phone call that I get.
Thank you. It'd be appreciated, I'm sure. And my final question for you today. If somebody is feeling that they're confused and they just don't know what to do,
Yeah.
or they're in the middle of a frustration that they're facing currently with, let's say, the attendance allowance, or maybe getting a blue badge, or will writing, or the LPA, or whatever it is, what would you suggest that they should do? I know that you'll say phone me, but not everyone can phone you. But what is it? What's your best advice for people?
Talk to people. Find a support group. Talk to your best friend. Share your story. By talking and sharing, you are empowering yourself. You're admitting, I've got a problem. So I would say, first of all, start talking to people, because somebody will say, I went to, or this is what I did. So, yes, people, please do phone me, but equally talk to, and if you feel you can't talk to your kids because sometimes families are fractious, then find your best friend and say, do you know what? I've just been listening to this podcast and it's made me think. And what do you think, Cyril? Yeah?
I didn't know that you knew Cyril.
Oh, I know Cyril very well. And just reach out and talk to somebody, share your story, because your pain that you're in might be their pain, and they might be able to give you some crumb of comfort, or, a problem shared is a problem halved, they say, don't they?
They certainly do, Caroline. And thanks for being here today. It's
No,
been
thank you.
appreciated. Um, People like you are invaluable
Thank you.
for the greater general public that just don't understand what they're entitled to, how to deal with some of the challenges that they had. So thanks for coming on the Chasing Care podcast. And I look forward to perhaps speaking to you again in the future.
Absolutely. Would love to, Gavin. Would love to.
For now, thank you indeed. Take care. My name's
Thank you.
Gavin Chase, the host of the Chasing Care podcast. We'll see you all again next time.